Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Real Gaming Podcast. I'm your host, PJ, also known as Dirty Mike on Twitch, where you can find me streaming a lot of these games we're going to be talking about on this podcast at twitch.tv/dirtymike_TV. And with me today, I have a very special guest and one I'm very, very excited about. She's been on the front page of Twitch. She does yoga. She does ASMR. She's done horror game streams. She's super, super talented streamer and a really good friend of mine. She's also the wife of Patrick, who we had on the last episode to talk about Jaws. Welcome in, Amber. How's it going?
Hey, man. I'm doing great. I've had an amazing day. I'm excited to be here with you.
Yeah, me too. I'm pretty excited about this. I know you're a big fan of the horror genre, and we're going to be talking about the Blair Witch today. So...
Yes. Oh my God. I love all things spooky, which is so funny because I spent most of my life being afraid of everything. And then there was just like this switch that flipped and now it's everything.
Yeah. Do you think it's just like you got kind of addicted to that like feeling of being kind of at the edge of your seat and scared, or?
I think I got just like inundated with it one Halloween when my college friends made us watch scary movies every single day for the month of October. And I didn't want to, but at the end of it, I was like, well, I've seen it all now. I guess I'm in.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like I've always kind of enjoyed horror films. I guess it probably started with me with Jaws. That movie scared the crap out of me as a kid. I was just terrified of the ocean. I didn't even live near the ocean, but I was just like even swimming in pools in the lakes. It was always in the back of my mind. And I kind of liked that. And I don't know, like I feel like I'm one of those people that when I watch horror movies, and eventually I got into horror games, which I think is even better for me. I just kind of want to be encircled and encapsulated by this universe that they've built and just kind of let go of everything else and just allow myself to feel kind of the fear that the characters are feeling. I don't know. Like some people go into horror movies are just like, I'm going to be tough and I'm going to convince myself that it's not real. And I kind of like that feeling that it is. And I think that's what makes Blair Witch such an interesting topic to talk about. So I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I mean, yeah, with Blair Witch, there was the question of, is it real? Right? I mean, when that first came out, I think it was kind of one of the first of that genre. It sort of set the precedent for found footage. And I think genuinely at that time, we were like, wait, did this actually happen?
Yeah, I think that's one of the interesting things we're going to be talking about. So for people who are new to this podcast, I should probably explain. We're going to talk about Blair Witch, the movie, and we talk about the video games that are based on movies and if, you know, they kind of hold up to the movie and if they kind of bring you into that same headspace and bring back that nostalgia or represent that movie universe. Well, this one's a little different because before the ones we did were directly based on the movie. And this one's kind of based on the universe that's created in that movie, the Blair Witch universe. The game Blair Witch, which came out, was it 2019, I believe? It's really recently. Yes, 2019.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah.
August 30th, 2019. That game was based on Blair Witch, but it actually takes place with different characters 2 years after the Blair Witch Project film takes place. So we're going to be talking about those. But yeah, let's dive into the movie because I'd love to talk about all that stuff with kind of the realism and how well they immersed just the audience and the actors as well in this universe and why that was so interesting. So for people who are not familiar with the Blair Witch Project, it's a 1999 American supernatural horror film. It was written and directed by Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez. And it's based off of a purportedly true story of three student filmmakers. You got Heather Donahue, Michael C. Williams, and Joshua Leonard. And they kind of are making this student documentary, and they go out into the woods to find this local legend known as the Blair Witch. And it kind of brings back this recovered footage. I guess it wasn't the first recovered footage type film. I'm not sure exactly what was. This was the first one that really kind of kicked off the others and kind of led the way for other films such as Paranormal Activity and Cloverfield and stuff, which is why I think it's kind of a fascinating and important film, really. But that's a little bit of the backstory. So I wanted to ask you what your experience with this film is. When did you first see this movie?
So I thought that I had seen it years ago. I've been living my whole life thinking, oh yeah, I've seen Blair Witch. And I realized just last week that I had seen Blair Witch 2. And I had Yeah, I had. Yeah. Oh, wow. And I had seen the remake, but I had never seen the original. So I went back and I watched the original. And I really, really wish that I had actually seen it early on because I've seen so much found footage now that it doesn't have that same feeling that I think it would have at the beginning. But I liked it.
Yeah.
I thought that, we said that I was watching it with Patrick actually, and we said that the acting was so bad that it was almost believable they were real.
In the original or in the
original?
Okay.
Yeah. In the original, like it was so bad that like they actually just seemed like real people.
Well, actually, in my mind, I thought the acting was good for that reason because it wasn't really acting as much as just three people kind of bickering at each other and trying to, be presentable on film. Like, I don't know if you've ever worked on a student project, but I feel like these people actually really represented well some of the people you would work with on a student film. I should have said student film project. And I figured you had. And because I went to school for film stuff for a while. And I thought just watching this reminded me so much of some of the people that I went to school with. But I actually had a similar experience. I had not seen this movie when it first came out. I was 8 years old, I guess, when it came out. And I was just definitely not allowed to watch this. And it was something that I wanted to watch. And it just kind of flew under the radar for me. I'd seen it parodied so many times. I kind of heard about it. So I didn't really get that experience. But I think it's fascinating because I did kind of get that experience with Paranormal Activity. So I feel like, yeah, exactly, right? Like you saw that one without probably knowing much about it, right?
Right.
Yeah, and when I had seen it, I kind of... This is one of the things I had talked to people who had seen this movie had said, like, you kind of knew that it probably wasn't real. Like, it doesn't seem, but in the back of your mind, you're kind of just like, I want to believe this is real. I don't really have any evidence that says it's not. And in fact, there's actually tons of evidence that said it was at the time, which is fascinating. But you kind of just like allow yourself to believe it. And it becomes that much more terrifying, thinking you're looking at some really crummy student film that was found in the woods and just, I don't know. It's fascinating that way. I got that with Paranormal Activity. I actually took my sister to see Paranormal Activity after I had seen it. And that movie scared the crap out of me. I remember that night, a little side note, after we had watched the movie, I was staying at my friend's house. We watched it in the middle of the day. And it like freaked me out. It freaked all of us grown men out in the middle of the day. And we went to my friend's house and he had a switch on his wall that would not only turn on the light bulb, but it would turn on and off the switch or the plug-in. So if we wanted to charge our cell phones, we had to leave the light on. And what we would do is we'd just stand on a chair and turn the light bulb out. And so we're all getting ready to go to bed, and he turns the light bulb all the way out, and we all had fallen asleep or were almost asleep, and the light bulb just came back on like super bright, like just out of nowhere. And he had turned this thing like a ways out. So he kept, he ended up taking it back out like all the way, and he almost had to take it completely out before it shut off, and it kind of freaked us out. And we're like, nope. And he turned it back in. It was like, it wasn't like it was like half twist out. It was like twisted, almost just dangling there out of the thing, and it still turned on. It kind of freaked us out. But I took my sister to see that movie, and I had known at this point it was fake, and I told her that it was real and that I'd seen it. And I felt like such a jerk afterwards because I swear she like was basically crying at the end. I had to explain to her that it was fake, and I felt so awful. But I imagine that's kind of the experience people got with the original Blair Witch. I had thought that you had seen it originally, but
I thought that I had too. And then I was watching. I was like, wait, I don't think I actually have. It's so funny. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
And it's so funny with horror. Like, I don't think that our world is scary. And I don't think that the dark is scary. I don't think like Bump in the Night is scary until you start watching horror films, right? Like it reframes the way we view things. What is that shadow in the corner? What was that sound at the end of the hall? It like plants in us this different experience of what's normal,
Oh yeah, for sure. Like anytime you've seen a good horror film, especially if you watched a lot of horror films younger, like I had, you're maybe taking the trash out at the end of the night and it's dark and the end of your driveway isn't fully lit up and you're just like, okay, something's rustling in the bushes. I know we have tons of rabbits around here, but it's probably Dogman, or it's probably
there's Freddy Krueger over there for sure.
Yeah, Freddy Krueger's definitely hiding in the bushes. I don't know. I do love that about horror films. They just kind of stick in the back of your mind really well.
Absolutely. And if you have an overactive imagination like I do, it gets real fun.
Yeah, for sure. So what did you think of the sequel? I know the sequel is quite a bit different. We'll get back to talking about the original movie in a second, but I was just curious about the sequel itself because I know it's way different.
honestly, I think I saw it when I was 13, early preteen. So I don't know. I remember being terrified. It was one of the earlier horror films I'd ever seen. I was at a Halloween party actually, and we watched it, and I was terrified. I like wanted to go outside and like not think about it ever again.
Gotcha. Because if I'm correct, and I have not seen the sequel, I know it was kind of rushed out. That the original team who had made this film, because it was kind of an independent film. It was bought by Artisan later on for $1.1 million. And we'll talk about some of the production in a minute. But from what I understood, it was directed by different people, and it was kind of, in a lot of ways, almost making fun of the original. So a lot of people didn't like it for the fact that it was like almost kind of shitting all over the original and saying like, oh, this movie's stupid. And, our movie's so much better.
I do remember the pacing being different. I do remember that.
It's more of an actual documentary style, right? Or from what you remember? Maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I wish I could remember more details on the sequel.
That's okay. I was just curious. What about, you said you'd seen the remake. That was what, 2016?
I have. Again, it's one of those ones that kind of went in and out of my brain. But if I remember correctly, I think there was a scene where they all wake up and they're separated from each other. That like is kind of sticking in my head. And I remember that being like an uncomfortable feeling, like being in the woods and being alone was like a really visceral like fear.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That kind of reminds me, like, some of the stuff to talk about the original movie again. You were talking about this kind of realism. And I want to talk about the realism of like what the audience believed. But what's fascinating to me is you were talking about the acting, right? And the acting comes across like you said, kind of like bad acting, but almost so bad it's realistic. And I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that the way this was filmed, it was filmed over 8 days with 3 completely unknown people. They never acted anything. There was like some casting call in New York, and people went there, and it was all improv. They just asked people improv questions, and if you didn't instantly do well at the improv, you didn't make it to the next round, because the whole script really was improvised. There was a 35-page script written by Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez that basically told the order of events that they wanted to happen roughly, and the general flow of conversation, but it didn't actually have lines. And it was all kind of it was all kind of just improv by these actors. And it was so, they were kind of dropped into the woods for almost no pay. And, just hoping to get their first chance to make it into the film industry, which in retrospect, probably this was the worst possible way to start. And they're dropped off for 8 days. They're given like a GPS satellite, and they're basically told, these were the coordinates that they had to make to by the end of the day. And they would find these milk crates with film canisters, like 35 millimeter film canisters. And they would open them up, and each one have their name on it, and they'd find some food and stuff like that. And they would have different directions of what they had to do for that day. So there's like a part in the film where Heather keeps saying, we need to head south. I'm sure of it. We have to head south. They didn't have the map anymore. And that was like her directions for that day, was just like, make sure we head south all day. Or I'm pretty sure at one point when Mike like discards the map, that was his directions. It's like, get the map away from Heather and chuck it. Just get rid of the thing. And there's like a lot of like, yeah. And apparently the actors got lost quite a few times. They had like walkie-talkies. They had a GPS so they could get unlost. But for most of the time, they were just not in communication with anybody from the film crew. And
this is really fantastic. Like, I had no idea about any of this, and now I kind of want to just go back and rewatch it, knowing that like that's such a different understanding of the film.
Yeah, I feel like I didn't know all of that when I first watched it. I like I said, I watched it in preparation for this podcast. I hadn't seen it before. I had known little things about it here and there just from hearing it over the years. I definitely had seen it parodied like a million times, especially that like snotty-nosed scene in the tent. I think Scary Movie parodied that, and probably everybody did at one point.
I mean, who didn't? The nostril flares. Oh my God, the nostril flares.
When you say nostril flares, I know this is a little not related, but did you ever watch the movie The Indian in the Cupboard? No.
Forever ago, yes. Okay,
yeah, me too. I haven't seen it since I was a kid. But every time I think about that movie, I can only think about all the weird shots. Like there's, the figures are like 2 inches tall, and they're camera's always looking up at the kid, and all you can see is his giant nostrils just flaring back and forth. And it was so distracting. Even when I was a kid, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm just sick of seeing up this kid's nose for half of the film.
Well, imagine how the Indian in the cupboard felt.
Yeah, I know. He's just like, all right, you need to trim up there, man. It's a lot of hair. But that's neither here nor there. But yeah, I don't know. Like the whole production of this was just these kids being dropped in the woods and kind of messed with. And I think a lot of the tension was real for that. I didn't know this. I just found this out. I was just reading about this before this call, and it says that all 3 leads in this movie didn't know that the Blair Witch was not actually real. Like they knew they were filming a fake movie, but they didn't know that the local legend of the Blair Witch was completely made up. And so like they're in these woods, like, yeah, we're filming a fake movie, but we're totally lost. And people in the town were just telling us this Blair Witch thing is real. Like a lot of the interviews they even did were staged by the directors. So they'd be like, hey, go interview people around town. And they would put plants in the town where they would coach them what to say about the Blair Witch. So they're going around. What? Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I feel like the interviews felt almost genuine. Like the people who were interviewed, I was like, are these real interviews? Do people like really think this in this town? Like that felt really real. That's so funny.
I actually agree. I thought the interviews were one of the best parts of the film, as far as like, there's that old man they're interviewing, and he's just like, oh yeah, I remember this. And he seemed really genuine about it. And then there's that lady with her kid, and the kid is like freaking out the more the mom's talking about the Blair Witch, like covering her mouth and stuff. I was like, holy cow, is there actually like a Blair Witch legend like in this area? Is this real? And that's what the actors apparently thought as well. So
that's so good. This is like giving like so many layers to this film, and just, I don't know, it somehow like makes it more credible for me, I guess. Like,
yeah, I think
the actors were so in the dark.
I think
literally
looking back at this film, like I wish, like we'd said, I wish I had seen this when it first came out and kind of gotten to be a part of that moment in cultural history and gotten to feel those things. The movie itself, to me, it's not a great film to me. Like, I'm not going to watch it all the time. I'm not dissing the film. I think what's interesting about the film to me is the backstory behind the film is almost more interesting and entertaining than the film is. And what it
100%.
Yeah, and what it set up as far as like, I'm a big fan. I actually really like Cloverfield. I know a lot of people don't like the shaky cam stuff. And I really liked, like I said, Paranormal Activity. And I feel like this is almost more of an important film than just a good film.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. Like I said, maybe it wasn't the first of its kind, but it set the precedence. And it definitely made a huge impact in the film world, the horror film world.
Yeah, and I mean, if you think about it at the time too, like this is the late 90s. And by this time, horror films had almost become kind of stagnant in a way. Like you're seeing a lot of the same slasher films get a lot of sequels, and there wasn't a lot of innovation in horror. And even like at one point towards the end of the 90s, you got Scream, and Scream is basically just making this grand point that horror films are all kind of the same, right? And it's just they're kind of like parodying the horror film. So by the time this came out, like it was so innovative for horror that I think it kind of like it reboosted the genre in a way and kind of like led it into new interesting places in the years to come.
And you make a really good point. What you said, it was
99 is when it came out. So they did film this 99. In 94, I think. Yeah, they started pre-production in 1993. They filmed in 90. I think they filmed in 94. It took a long time to get this movie out for a lot of reasons, which we can go into. But what were you going to say?
I was going to say, with it being in the 90s or even the early 2000s, it's not like the internet was like a large part of our life at that time. So it was maybe a little bit easier to get away with convincing people it was real. You know what I mean? You couldn't just easily look that up like you could now.
Yeah, and that's actually something I think the people who created this film even said is like cell phones weren't really, not everybody had a cell phone, not everybody had internet, and if they did, it was dial up and it was really slow, and not everybody was Googling everything, and even if you did, it's not like everything was easy to find. It's like people knew how to just easily find, you know, news articles and police records and stuff that could easily disprove this. It just wasn't a thing people did back then.
Right.
So that did kind of lead to it. Yeah, so let's talk about them kind of convincing people, because I found out something interesting about this film, that there was actually a mockumentary made, a mockumentary that was put on Sci-Fi Channel. So like the week before this film comes out, they actually put out this fake documentary that seemed real. I actually just watched it, and it actually seems kind of legit, especially for the time, where they're just talking about this town and they're talking about this legend of the Blair Witch, and they go into all the backstory about the guy who killed all those kids and how he was saying it was the Blair Witch talking to him through his head. And it all seems real. They're even going into like, these kids are missing. And it's all leading up to the found footage coming out in theaters. Did you know about this, or have you ever seen this?
I did not know. Maybe there's like a vague memory of hearing about it, but I didn't see it, and I love this.
Yeah, it's actually pretty well done. And what I had realized doing more research is they had, I don't remember how many hours, tons of, it might have been 16 or more hours of footage to cut down, right? Because it's just them walking around the woods with 2 cameras for 8 days, right? So when they cut this down the first time, they cut it down to 2.5 hours. It was spliced together kind of like a documentary, the way that The Curse of the Blair Witch which is what I was talking about. It was kind of like that, where they had newsreel stuff put in there, and they had interviews with family members, and they had people talking about the witch trials and all these things. And they kind of cut it down and realized that what made a more compelling film and what made it scarier to the audience was to cut all of that out and just show the raw footage that these kids had taken. And so they kind of used that extra to actually hype it up, which I thought was really fascinating. They basically cut it into 2 films, released one on TV. Yeah, well, yeah, for sure. They released one on TV, and people are watching this, on the Sci-Fi Channel or wherever, and they're prepared to go see this film because they'd been hearing about it, and they've been seeing these missing person billboards and posters put up, which is another thing they did. And they're like, okay, this is legit. Like, there's a documentary on TV about this.
It must be real.
Yeah, exactly. It must be real. So I don't know. I thought that was kind of fascinating as far as that went. I was talking, for anybody who doesn't know, I do try to stream these games. We're going to be talking about the Blair Witch game. I was streaming it last night to finish the game. I'd never played it before. I know you had played it before. I think I did.
I played it when it first came out.
Yeah, I think I'd watched some of your stream, but I'd seen people stream it, but I just finished it. And I was talking to people about this on Twitch last night. And somebody in New Zealand told me that when they had seen this movie, that their town actually had missing persons posters for these people, like up around town around the week of the movie coming out.
Interesting that they would have missing persons posters in New Zealand for people that were missing in Maryland.
Yeah, no, I know. It's a little weird, but it's like apparently they went to that length that like there was people putting up these posters like everywhere. And in Maryland, I don't know what they're going to do in New Zealand, but I just thought that was kind of interesting. They were even listed on IMDb as missing or deceased when this movie came out. Yes. And I guess it really hurt their acting career. There was a lot of bad blood between the 3 actors and Artisan who bought this film. Because, like I said, this film was made for a cost of around $60,000. It ended up making $248 million, which is insane.
That is a really nice profit. I think most filmmakers would be pretty happy with that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it comes out to a ratio of there was $10,931 made for every dollar spent, which is insane. I mean, it's probably got to be like one of the biggest budget ratios in film history, I would think. I don't know.
Maybe. Wow, it's baffling to me that something so simple and with such a low production did so well. But I think that's what makes it, if it was produced well, then it's not believable.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like I said, it does look like a crummy student film. You could tell that they didn't really know how to use the cameras that well, which, I mean, when I had worked with other people who were really good at all that stuff, and then I worked with people who thought they were good at that stuff and were just really bad at it. And that's kind of what this comes across as. I guess they gave the actors like a 2-day crash course on camera stuff, and there was a lot of problems. There's even apparently this was something we were talking about with Jaws, like not showing the monster, and it really is not shown. It's more like the presence of this creature or this witch is felt. But apparently there was somebody running around in like white like linen robes and long johns and stuff, freaking the characters out. And at one point they're like looking around like, oh my gosh, do you see that? And they never like point the camera at it, so they never actually catch it on film. And so it never makes it into the movie, which kind of makes it better, I think, probably than if it would have been seen? I don't know.
Well, yeah, I like when we don't see the monster, because then we create the monster. Like, what is the most terrifying thing that we would experience out there? You know what I mean? Like, if we see it, we're like, that's not so bad, or that doesn't look real, or whatever the excuse is. But if we never ever see that, it's going to be my most terrifying image, which may be different than your most terrifying image. You know what I mean? It like allows us to live in our own fear, which I kind of like.
Yeah, and I think Roger Ebert actually pointed this out. He had a review on this. He gave it a 4-star, and he said, at a time when digital techniques can show us almost anything, the Blair Witch Project is a reminder that what really scares us is the stuff we can't see. The noise in the dark is almost as scarier than what makes the noise in the dark. Any kid can tell you that. Not that he believes it at the time. So I think a lot of people recognize that is one of the things that made it good. And I feel like, and we will talk about the game in a little bit, I feel like the game actually does a pretty good job of carrying that type of horror and suspense and fear over. There's more in the game that has to do with sounds really than anything else. And I thought the sounds were one of the best parts of the game. In review, this movie got an 87% on the tomato meter. It got a 56% audience score. So it's always been a kind of divisive film. Some people get it. Some people really like it. Some people don't. Like I said, watching it now, it's not as highly rated to me. Knowing the backstory and knowing all that stuff makes it better to me. But I really think if I had seen it at the time, it would have been something that kind of stuck in my head. And I know for a lot of people, it really did. So,
yeah, like I said, absolutely. If I wish that I had seen it at that time, and now I want to rewatch it, knowing everything that you've just told me about it. I think that really elevates it for me.
Yeah, for sure. So you played the game. I wanted to ask you what your initial thoughts are on the game. But first, I'll just kind of bring up what this game is a little bit. So, like I said, this game came out just last year in 2019, August 30th. It was published by Lionsgate Games for Microsoft Windows, PlayStation 4, and Xbox One. And it's like, as you would expect, a psychological survival horror game. It was developed by Bloober Team, and it was based on, obviously, the movies. And this game takes place 2 years after the events. So it doesn't take place in 2001. I know the movie came out in 99, but the events of the movie were filmed and take place in 1994. And then the game takes place in 1996, which at first I was a little confused on. He does have a cell phone, but it's like really old looking cell phone. And I was trying to figure this out. Actually, I don't remember if they even said in the game exactly when it takes place, but I just kind of looked that up. And there's, a lot of mechanics in it. They're like dealing with the dog and with stealth and the woods and the darkness. But we can get into that later. What was your experience with this game? I know you streamed this game, and I think you were a fan of it, if I'm correct.
Yeah, I played it right when it came out. I think it might have been the day that it came out. And I had really, really high expectations. I was really excited about it. There was a ton of hype about the dog. Everyone was just really excited that you could pet the dog in the game.
Yeah, it's cool. You can like customize the dog's hair color and his collar and his eye color. And there's like, you can give him treats and pet him and stuff like that. It was like, you even get an achievement for the first time you pet the dog.
Yeah, I think how you treat the dog has a lot to do with how your game turns out, actually.
Yeah, I was curious about that because this is a game with multiple different endings, and I'm not sure what I got the bad ending, by the way.
I did too.
Actually, I think it's only got two endings, a good and a bad ending. I think I got the bad ending. I did get the bad ending, and I don't know what it was that I did. I know there was certain times, especially when you're streaming, that you're kind of talking to people and you're like, oh shoot, what did I miss? And I think I like maybe messed a few parts up because of that, but I probably had to do with the dog. I don't think I gave him enough. I don't think I gave him enough belly rubs, maybe.
See, yeah, I ended up with the bad ending too, and I didn't realize there were multiple endings until after I finished the game, and I was like, I don't understand how there could be different endings because this game, it feels pretty linear. Like, I'm not sure where I could have made like a lot of different choices, but I think the dog is key, and you're not supposed to be away from your dog, right? And so I think there were times where I would get lost and be like, oh wait, where's my dog? And I think that kind of screwed me over.
Yeah, and the dog is an interesting part of the game because the main character, and I shouldn't even have to say this. There's obviously going to be huge spoilers. I know the movie's been out for a while. The game hasn't been out for as long, so there's going to be spoilers about the game as well. But the main character is kind of dealing with PTSD, and there's parts in the game where if you get away from the dog, I mean, he starts to freak out. Like his eyesight gets blurry. I think in one part it actually forces you to be away from the dog, and your character passes out. If I'm correct, so. That's kind of
fairly
a mechanic
early
of the
on,
game.
yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty early on. So what did you think of it overall, though? Like, is this a game that you really enjoyed, or?
I think it's a game worth playing. I definitely think it's a game worth playing and exploring, because there's some cool mechanics with the video camera. I think that the story is a little bit busy.
Sure.
That there's like a lot going on. That I think it would have been a little more enjoyable for me if it was slightly more simplistic. I don't mean like a simple story, but just a more focused story. But it's scary. There's definitely some moments in it that like are uncomfortable. The tree and like the monster with the tree and the flashlight. You have to like shine your flashlight on this monster. That whole scene and like not knowing where it's going to be, and just like the fear of anticipation. Like that was a really great moment in the game. I will say it's a good game. It's worth playing. Probably not top 10 for me, but if you haven't played it, you should play it.
Yeah, and I kind of agree. I feel like the movie and the game are both my overall opinion. I'll explain why, and we'll get into all the mechanics and plot points of this. But I feel like the movie and the game are both that for me. They're a game that's worth playing. I'm not sure I would really want to revisit either one anytime soon, but I did enjoy it. And you said, I have to bring this up. You said the tree monster thing with the flashlight. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I was playing the first half of this game with another streamer friend, Tentacle Princess, who was on an earlier episode that we talked about Constantine. And that part where you first run into the monster for the first time and you have to use your flashlight to kill it, like I jumped pretty hard. I'm not going to lie. There's some definite good jump scares in this, but she jumped so hard that she basically fell over in her chair and like cut her leg. I felt super bad. She like sliced it too. And I was like, oh my gosh. Like it was a very visceral reaction to the jump scares. It does have a lot of jump scares, but it's not entirely reliant on jump scares, which is one of the things I liked about it.
I remember having that conversation when that game came out, when I was streaming it, that people liked that it didn't rely on the jump scares. A lot of games that I was playing at the time were just jump scare central, which I actually really enjoy. But people liked that wasn't the case with this one.
Yeah, I mean, jump scares are great. Jump scares are great to put into any good horror game or horror film, but there are definitely games where that is the only thing they have going for them, and I feel like they fall flat in a way. Like you even said, like this is a game you liked, but you probably wouldn't revisit, and I feel like that is kind of what relying too much on jump scares really does. For me, and I'll say this again and again, like my favorite horror series of all time is Silent Hill, for the exact reason that it does so well at building a universe that you're terrified to be inside of all the time. You're not just terrified when you have to open a door and a cat jumps out at you, or which is actually something that happens, or when you see a mannequin, its head gets chopped off, which is another thing that actually happens in the Silent Hill series, and it starts bleeding and stuff. Like it's not just the jump scares, which are obviously memorable, but it's just this whole atmosphere, this whole universe. One of my favorite of those series, I was actually end up talking about this last night on stream, was Silent Hill 4 was one of my favorites. We were talking about this being a first-person horror game, which is what Blair Witch is. And in Silent Hill 4, it's third person most of the time, and then you kind of come back to your apartment, and it becomes first person. And those parts of like trying to navigate this tiny little apartment where there's not really a ton going on, it's kind of your safe space in this game most of the time. As soon as that becomes not a safe space anymore, which happens about halfway through the game, that is the most terrifying part of it. Like there's definitely something to be said about first person horror, but there's even something more to be said about just taking and making the atmosphere around you scary. Like you know that nothing in your apartment is going to jump out and attack you and kill you. You know that you're not going to die there, but yet the atmosphere itself is just so foreboding that you just don't even want to be there. You just want to get out.
They've just like placed you in a permanent state of on edge. Amnesia does a really good job of that. The soundscape and atmosphere in that game just makes you feel uneasy every second of gameplay.
Yeah, and that was another one I thought of. When I play this game, it reminds me of Amnesia in some ways. I think I liked Amnesia better overall. But it definitely does that. And they both use kind of a stealth aspect to them. Yeah,
and they're both kind of puzzly.
What do you think about stealth in horror games? Do you like it, or does it take away from it for you? That was some of the negative reviews about this game, is about halfway through the game, it does move into more stealth gameplay than the first half doesn't have any of that at all?
I like stealth. I think that in a horror game, it's kind of perfect because, I mean, let's think about it. If there's some terrifying thing somewhere around you, you're going to be stealthy. You don't want it to know where you are. I think it's very logical and can be incredibly terrifying in a horror game. I will say that with Blair Witch, there were times where their stealth felt a little clunky. Like it didn't seem intuitive on quite how to maneuver the space.
Yeah, it did do that a little bit.
Yeah, but the concept of it, I think, was fantastic.
I feel like some of the stealth worked. Some of it kind of fell flat. I feel like the first part of the stealth worked. So once you get to this point in the game where you have your camera all of a sudden has kind of a night mode feature. So there is like the use of the camera is kind of a cool nod back to the film. There's some really cool aspects with it as far as like rewinding tapes to kind of rewind time around you. And it's kind of interesting how this game takes these aspects of shifting time, and there's even a part where you call yourself 24 hours prior. Like there's a part where you hear somebody talking to you, and then later on you have to be the one making the call. There's like time splitters kind of thing. They didn't really explore it a lot. There is, and I do actually want to come back to that point you're saying about the story being a little all over the place. We'll get into that, yeah. But as far as the stealth goes, it kind of starts off this part where you're going through the woods. You have this camera, and you can see through the camera certain things that are lit up, a trail that you need to follow or an object you need to get to. And then you start seeing these red creatures, and they say to you, the guy says to you, you can't kill these with your flashlight, which was kind of the it has a little bit of a combat aspect in that. Basically just a creature's going to come at you and you shine your flashlight at it. You have to use the dog to point it out. So there's not a lot of combat in this game really, but the stealth aspect in that part I felt like worked pretty well. As far as just like make sure you're looking left and right, make sure you're giving a wide berth to these things and being quiet. And I kind of like that, but it was later on in the house when it's like, here's a room and you can't see the room or its layout, but there's a creature in there and you have to navigate through the room while keeping your back to the creature the whole time. And it was kind of cool at first, but then it was just like, all right, I'm just going to go into this room 10 or 15 times and die till I can get figure it out in my head what it looks like and just try to navigate it backwards. And it kind of ruined the horror aspect to me a little bit. It became a little bit too, okay, I know I'm going to die. It doesn't creep me out anymore. Like, I feel like a good horror game should not be a game where you die often enough because once you start to die often enough in a horror game, you kind of aren't scared of dying anymore. You know what I mean?
Right. Like you've checked that box and it's not so bad. And
yeah, you get over it, right?
Yeah.
I feel like you should always feel like you're just about to die, but you don't generally die very often. I feel like those are the best horror games.
I never really thought about that, but that actually makes a lot of sense. That the fear, you know what? Now that I'm thinking about it, yeah, horror games that I've played where I just keep dying in one spot over and over again, like it just becomes tactical and I get frustrated and I'm not in the moment. I'm not feeling that fear anymore. You're absolutely right about that.
Yeah, I think the best example of that was, did you ever play Evil Within?
I think I started the first one, but wasn't super excited about it, so I never finished it.
So my opinion of Evil Within is that the first half, or the first third at least, is probably my favorite horror game ever made, and then the latter parts of it is one of the worst. Like, and the reason I say that is the beginning of the game actually uses stealth in a very interesting way. I'm a huge stealth fan. Metal Gear Solid and Splinter Cell are some of my favorites. I'm a huge fan of the stealth genre, and this game mixed horror and stealth so well in the beginning of it. You're having to sneak around creatures, and you're having to eventually like set up traps and use knives and do all these kind of like puzzles. You get to this like big town where like this whole puzzle of how to sneak around and kill everything without being spotted. And then it just becomes, hopefully you have enough ammo to kill all these things. Hopefully your crossbow bolts you crafted enough of them, or you're screwed. And you end up just playing this game where it's just like, I never have enough ammo. I'm running around. I'm dying all the time. It's just hordes of zombies, and it just completely ruins. It's a totally different game in the second half. It's not at all what you start with. Sorry, what?
That just sounds tedious.
It becomes tedious, and I know that some people give it a better rating than I would. I feel like I just can't enjoy the game because of it. It takes away all of the horror out of it, and that's what I guess the point I was making with. Once you start dying all the time, once you feel like it's just a battle of do I have enough ammo, and it becomes more Resident Evil 5 than Resident Evils 1 through 3, it doesn't it doesn't hold up as far as a horror game anymore.
Yeah, I can see that. With Blair Witch, I think there's a point, if I'm not mistaken, in the house where it's not even just about turning your back to them, but I'm pretty sure you have to look at the floor. Am I right? If you look up, you die.
Yeah, there was a part I couldn't figure out how to get through this room. Somebody's like, just look at the floor. I'm like, that'll never work. And I just looked at the floor and kind of wandered around, and all of a sudden I was safe. Like, I have no idea what I did, but I just kind of stared at my feet for a while. I don't. That's why I say I don't feel like that part, the stealth, held up as well.
Yeah, there's definitely points in the house where that I got through that I have no idea how I got through. You know what I mean? It was like, am I looking down? Am I looking at the wall? Am I backing in? Like, I just tried all these different things. And I mean, it was just kind of pure luck for me through a lot of that. And I don't like that. I like knowing what's happening. And I felt a little like just got to get through this, you know?
There was parts of that. I feel like an interesting thing to relate the movie to the game a little bit is the house in the end of the game is the same as the house in the end of the movie. And I felt like both of them kind of got it wrong a little bit. I feel like the house in the movie was almost too short. Like, I really enjoyed the suspense that it built when they went into this house, when they're going up the stairs and down the stairs and looking around. And I know that they had tried to film alternative endings after this movie got bought, and none of them really worked, and they went with the original. And I get that, but I still feel like it was almost too short. It didn't build the suspense up quite enough. And I know it was trying to stay more realistic, I guess, because that was the only part of the film that was really a lot more scripted. It was no longer, you're in the woods, do this on your own. Like, this was scripted. They did reshoots. It was a totally different part of the film. But the house in the game, I almost felt like lasted too long. I don't know. It's like you get there and you're like, oh, yay. And it's really freaky at times and through parts of it. But it almost dragged a little bit from me. I don't know.
I definitely agree with the house in the movie. Maybe because it was more scripted, that if it had gone much longer, we would kind of pick up on that more. So maybe it had to be short. But we spent so much time building up to that. It was a very small payoff.
It really was. And I feel like it ended too quickly. Like, I feel like I'm not even sure what I would have done, but I feel like maybe even just like a longer shot on the guy in the corner or something. Like, it just fell a little flat to me, and I can't exactly explain why.
Yeah. I mean, that whole, I guess they got their point across, because that whole facing the wall thing has become such a trope, you know, in the horror genre. Like, I feel like that comes from this, right? Comes from Blair Witch.
I would think so. And they even implement it in the game at one part, which was kind of neat to me. I kind of enjoyed that.
I mean, for such a, huge part of that story and something that has really lingered, it is such a brief moment.
Yeah, it felt too brief. And I feel like even just extending the shots out a little bit, letting that suspense build a little bit before somebody falls, or before, like, I don't know if like including a jump scare at the final, like the way Paranormal Activity kind of did. Like, I don't know if that would have worked or kind of ruined the realism, but I just feel like it was just too short somehow. I don't know how else to say it than that. It was building suspense so well, and I feel like another 30 seconds, my heart would have been beating just fast enough to feel like the end was a little more justified. I'm not sure how else to explain it than that, but
I don't disagree. And with the game, with being in the house too long, I kind of agree. I think because of the film and I don't know, like, you get to the house, you think, okay, I'm almost there. But
yeah, exactly. But you're not. It's like it's quite a long trip through the house. That actually brings me to another thought I had on this game, is the maps in this game are actually very small. You spend a really long time just wandering around the same parts of the woods, and kind of like, if you really are paying attention, you're kind of just circling back on yourself a lot. And one of the things I learned early on in the game is that if you feel lost, you're supposed to. And if you just continue to travel in any direction long enough, it'll basically lead you to wherever you need to go. Like, the maps just kind of shift and change around you, which in a way is actually kind of interesting, because they get lost in the movie. Like, most of the movie is them being lost. Almost all of it is them being lost. And in the game, it feels the same. Like, they actually did kind of incorporate that from the movie. Like, you're really lost. There's a part in the movie where they travel south all day, and then they end up in the same spot that they started in the morning. And the game does that. It kind of plays on the way the witch shifts reality, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember feeling lost very quickly in the game. But you're right, the space does feel small though confusing. Now that
It's
I'm
a really
remembering.
weird, but it kind of works too, because if the woods would have been as open as they felt originally and you got lost, like there's nothing in the woods to signify where you're at most of the time. And if it would have been like that, where there's just this huge map and you can really, really get lost, no one would have played it. You'd have been like, okay, I got to backtrack 20 minutes in some random direction. I have no compass. I'm just like, hopefully at one point I'll have ran into the thing I'm supposed to run into. And I don't think it would have worked.
Yeah, so I guess they kind of thought that out. It worked out pretty well.
Yeah, I don't even think I was complaining. I just thought it was interesting that the map is so small and the house at the end is the same small house, yet you're in it for hours because it's just shifting and changing around you.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on, his whole backstory and how that plays into the game?
Yeah, that's one of the things I wanted to bring up. I like the fact that they expand on one of the smaller parts of the film that you don't think about a lot, or at least I think a lot of people don't think about, which is in the film, there's basically this story of these kids who were taken. And I mean, it does focus on it, but this kind of gives a little bit more of the backstory to it almost. These kids that were taken and killed by this guy who said he was being controlled by the Blair Witch, right? So it's not even the Blair Witch itself is always the enemy. And the game kind of takes on that and shows you chasing this guy who's doing the same thing. And it kind of shows this cycle. And with the story, I feel like you were right in saying it tried to focus on too many things. Like it does this whole PTSD war thing. And it does this, he's a bad cop thing. And it does this, he was in a psych ward as a kid. And he was probably abducted as a kid. But none of them paid off really well, except for, I guess, the war part of it. And I feel like in a movie or a game like that, you need like one big payoff or one big twist to their backstory. And it felt like most of the backstory went really unexplored. I don't know. Is that kind of how you felt, or?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're dealing with the witch and the guy in the woods and the missing child and his relationship issues and his violent past and the war and, his PTSD. Like there's so many things. I never saw it all super duper connect. Like, why did he need to have all of this backstory? Couldn't we just have a cop in the woods looking for this kid, finding this other guy? Or maybe this is a story about a guy who's dealing with his demons and, that's the focus. That's the thing that happens at the end. He either succumbs to them or, walks away from them. But without the witch, I don't know. There's just too many layers for me. Like I couldn't grasp on to any of it firmly.
Yeah, I feel the same. Like I feel like in something like this, you obviously have to build the lore of the witch and the woods and all that stuff. And usually you have a character who's got some interesting thing in his background he has to struggle with. That's how a lot of psychological horror works. And in this, it felt like there was way more about him. Most of it didn't pay off. And there wasn't enough about the lore of the woods, the witch, the Carver, the main bad guy. It felt like here's a thread that we're going to follow, but it's not really going to go anywhere. And ultimately, by the end of the game, my biggest thought was, who the hell gave this guy a gun ever? Like,
right.
There's a part in the game where they're like, hey, this guy's completely nuts. He does not belong in society. It'd be great if we sent him to Iraq for Desert Storm. And then he totally messes up, gets a bunch of people killed, almost gets court-martialed. He comes home, they're like, it would be great. Let's make this guy a police officer. It's like, just stop. And then after all that, after he screws up the police officer thing, like, it would be great if we send this guy in the woods alone to find a child. Like, why does this guy get so much trust? Like, he's not that good of he's not a very good person, really. No,
apparently he's quite cunning. I guess he's like, I don't know, the Jeffrey Epstein of Burkittsville.
Yeah, I guess so. And I mean, by all accounts, he's terrible to his wife. There's nothing redeemable about this character, really. And it's just a series of, why are you letting this guy do anything? Like, lock this guy away. He's gonna snap. And he already has. It's like, just no.
Yeah, but what's weird is, despite all of these horrible things that he's done and gotten away with, and how, messed up he really is, because we're experiencing it as him, they create this sympathy. Like we feel for him. We feel bad that his relationship is breaking up. You know what I mean? For like a lot of the story, you're like emotionally invested in this really messed up guy.
I get what you're saying, but I almost disagree because I feel like that's where it fell flat with me a little bit, is you're supposed to, right? Like when you're in the eyes of a main character, you're supposed to relate to them and feel sympathy for them. But I had a really hard time feeling sympathy or relating with this guy. Like obviously I felt bad when you're talking about all the PTSD stuff, which apparently from things I've read from veterans who have played this game, they really did get the PTSD kind of aspect of this well by a lot of accounts, which is awesome. I think that's great. But
that's good they were responsible with that.
Yeah, they were responsible with it. Exactly. But I feel like it's so hard to relate to this guy. He just seems awful in so many ways. And you want to feel sympathy for him. But I feel like by the end of the game, I was just like, I don't care about this guy at all.
I feel so bad, I guess. Like, what does that say about me?
No, I don't know. Maybe I'm just really a terrible person.
Crazy person. Can't relate.
I think I'm just a dick. Like, I don't know. I just didn't like the guy. But
either you're a dick or I'm actually insane. It could go either way.
It could be a bit of both. Who knows? Who's to say? Because everybody knows that Twitch is just known for a lot of great mental health. Everybody who's a Twitch streamer.
For sure. We're super solid.
For sure. So anyway, I don't know. I think the story is a little bit of what fell flat. I did enjoy kind of the world building that it did and adding to the lore. I think that was pretty well done.
I think that there is a lot more to this whole world, this whole story than that movie or this game. You know what I mean? Like there were other kids that disappeared. There's so much more to the story of, is it Burkittsville and the Black Hills? Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, there's the witch herself. Like, how ancient is this witch? You know, how long does this story go on? How many kids have disappeared? Who else was impacted? How many men have had her in their heads? You know, I think that there's so much room to grow and explore, and so much story to tell.
Yeah, I actually feel like the bad ending of the game explained more of the story than the good ending, because I did watch both of them, and the bad ending basically shows that there's kind of this cycle of violence that's happening where the witch is controlling somebody who's already demented or something and convincing them to basically take and abduct and kill these children for her. And it ends where, in the bad ending anyway, it ends where the main character kills the guy who's doing all this and takes up his mantle. And I feel like that almost explained more of the lore that way than you get the other way, where it's kind of like he triumphs. He doesn't become him, I guess. It still kind of explains it, but I feel like the bad ending actually gave more depth to what was really going on.
Doesn't she say something like take his face?
She does, yeah. She says something about taking his face. It's a little weird.
So I wonder if that's kind of literal, like whether it's sort of the skin wearing thing or
some kind of like Ed Gein thing. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know, because the guy wasn't like wearing.
That's more interesting.
The guy wasn't like wearing someone else's face. I'm not sure if that was like that's how you pass it on. You like take their face. I don't know, but
I don't know. I want that. That's so creepy and interesting. This witch tells you like put on somebody else's face. Like that's so much creepier than now I'm in your head. You know what I mean? Like,
oh, for sure, yeah.
Oh, I would love that.
So this game was made by the people who made Layers of Fear and Observer. Did you play either of these? Did you like some of the other stuff that they've done?
I love Layers of Fear. I played the first and second one. I thought they were fantastic.
Nice. Yeah, I've never played either one, but I've heard a lot of good stuff about Layers of Fear.
I haven't played Observer. I don't know much about Observer, but the Layers of Fear games are fan-freaking-tastic. One thing I love about those games is you enter a room and you do all the things in the room and you're like, okay, well, there's no other way out of here. I don't understand. And you're standing around like, how am I supposed to get out of this room? And eventually you think, oh, I guess I'll just go back the other way. And when you open the door, you're in a completely different place.
Yeah, no, that's pretty cool. I mean, I feel like this game kind of did that, especially in the house towards the end. Like, there's a lot of people that didn't like the game, but they really like the other stuff this team has made. But they liked certain aspects of this and would like to see them kind of take that and put that into some of their future stuff. I think this is a very good looking game for sure. And I definitely agree that it's worth playing at least once. It's not something I'm going to revisit a lot, but I did enjoy it for sure.
Yeah, I think it would be worth revisiting one more time just to see if it's possible to get the second ending, the
Just give
good
the dog
ending.
lots of belly rubs and see if it
Yeah,
works out.
love the dog, lots and lots. Because, like I said, the first playthrough, finding out that there were alternate endings, I just didn't understand how there could be. So it would be fun to explore that.
Yeah, for sure. I know I've said this to you before and I keep bringing it up. I think you've told me you've never played Silent Hill, and I really think you should, because those games are fantastic for the multiple endings.
Yeah, I'm really shocked. For as many horror games as I have played, and I have played many, and not just, the well-known ones, but like tons of these tiny little indie games that are a minute long or 15 minutes long. Like I have just dug into the world of spooky games. But I have not played any of the Silent Hills, and I can't believe I'm saying that, but maybe I will. Maybe I'll do it.
Yeah, you should. You should. I think you said you've played PT, but that's not really exactly the same. That was fantastic though for a demo. It's like super scary.
Oh, it's unbelievable. Actually, we probably play that once or twice a year, honestly, just to revisit that. And
I wish I had a PS4 that had that on it. I really do.
It's so good. It's so good.
Was it PS3 or PS4 that it was on the demo?
PS4. We have it on the PS4.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things I was thinking about, like with this game and kind of the extended lore, like, do you feel like this is a good direction for the extended lore of the game? Would you like to see more Blair Witch stuff come out? Do you think they could do more stuff with Blair Witch as far as like video games or movies or other media?
I think that there's plenty that could be done with it. Absolutely. I think, like I said, there's so many more stories to tell. I mean, maybe an origin story, would be really fascinating. I think an origin story game would be unbelievable for this.
I would love to see more horror games based in the past. Like Amnesia kind of does that, but I think it would be really cool to see like a 1700s, like middle of the witch trials type of horror game. I don't know if somebody's done it, but I think it'd be really cool.
I would play the heck out of that. I have I have an obsession with history.
Me too.
I just like obsessively read things about the Tudor family and the French court, and all these things are super, super fascinating to me. American Revolutionary history, the witch trials, all of that I like spend time reading about this stuff. I love it. So seeing more games, more historical based games, and especially with a horror twist, would just like make me giddy. I would just literally jump and click my heels to play games like that.
Oh, for sure. I'm a huge history nerd. I love studying all kinds of stuff. Lately, I've just been like studying classical Greek literature and that time period and stuff. Cause I just get into those rabbit holes where I'm like, I'm just so fascinated by this time period. And like you and me are both big fans of the horror genre. I think actually historical fiction horror is a totally like untapped, could be absolutely amazing genre for video games.
Let's make some games, man.
Let's do it. All right. So the only other thing I wanted to say about this lore was I kind of wonder if like you like the Cloverfield movie, right? Yay, nay, no. Meh. You ever watch the sequels?
Meh. No.
I don't know. I actually kind of like the fact that Cloverfield with each movie ends up changing the genre that it's in completely. I always thought that was kind of fascinating. Like I know with the first to second Blair Witch movies, they kind of change genres in a little bit, and then the game changes it even a little bit more. And I'm kind of fascinated by stuff that does that, like Cloverfield being a found footage horror film, 10 Cloverfield Lane being like a psychological thriller of a totally different nature, and then it becomes like a space futuristic thing. Like, I don't know, I kind of like that, like having the same world building, but just completely going in different directions. I always thought it was kind of fascinating. I don't know if Blair Witch could do something like that, but I just thought I'd bring that up.
I'm now remembering I have seen 10 Cloverfield Lane, and I actually thought that was a phenomenal film. Cloverfield, meh. 10 Cloverfield Lane, amazing.
Yeah, I could see that. Like, I liked the original Cloverfield, but 10 Cloverfield Lane just blows it out of the water for sure.
Yeah, so good. And I think Blair Witch absolutely could do something like that. I mean, now that we know it's not real, you know what I mean? And we can create this universe. They could absolutely make it more of a psychological thriller, or even like a cool slasher with that universe as well. I think a Blair Witch slasher flick would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm saying is like once you get past the original being the found footage phenomenon that it was, the convincing everybody that these actors are really dead and the wanted posters and billboards and the whole marketing team and promotion behind this movie is insane. And then once you kind of lose that aspect, maybe shifting to a different way, I feel like this game did that in a kind of, not like a huge shift, but it took it in a new direction. It gave it kind of more lore building. So if you are a big fan of the Blair Witch movie, I think it's definitely worth playing. I think even if you're a fan of horror games in general, it's actually a pretty good play. I think you can beat it in 7 to 8 hours, which is pretty standard for most single player horror games, I would say.
Yeah, it felt pretty quick.
Yeah, it wasn't too long. I beat it in 2 streams, and I don't think I streamed more than 4 hours each time. So something like that.
Yeah.
So anyway, thank you so much for coming on this episode. I love talking about the Blair Witch with you, and I hope that you'll come back for future episodes. Where can people find you, by the way?
Oh, well, thanks so much for having me. This was actually a lot of fun, and I really do hope we get to do this again. You can find me at twitch.tv/AmberGlowYoga. I teach yoga to gamers and do some ASMR to help people relax. And come hang out with me.
Yeah, your stuff is great. My wife is a huge fan of the yoga and the ASMR. And I like to do a little bit of the yoga too, but I don't. I'm not usually awake at the time that you're doing it. I work nights, so
Totally
I appreciate your channel and appreciate what you're doing. And I hope to have you on for a future episode.
Sounds great. Thanks again.
Awesome. Well, if you want to listen to this has been the Real Gaming Podcast. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Real Gaming Pod. That's real with 2 E's. And if you want to see me stream some of the gameplay for these games that are going to be coming up, you can follow me at twitch.tv/dirtymike_TV. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep it real.